Here they come.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see all of you. Thank you for joining us for our third part of our month-long series celebrating accomplished women in Oregon. This is part of our support and celebration for International Women's Month. We have been so grateful to have such an incredible group of esteemed speakers. I know a number of you have been able to join us for the first two of these presentations, and I am so pleased that you are back, and welcome for those who might be the first time that you are joining us. I want to remind everyone that we are recording this presentation today, and that is so that those who are unable to attend can enjoy the conversation. If you do not want to be on screen, you can turn off your camera. At the end of the presentation today, we will have time for Q&A, and those questions can be both posted in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I unfortunately am going to have to leave shortly after the introduction. I am double booked today, but I'm looking forward to watching this presentation later. I am really, really thrilled that we have our special guest today with us, and it's Diane Linn, who is the Executive Director of Proud Ground. Diane has over 38 years in the private, public, and nonprofit leadership sector. And since 1998, she has focused her services on low income and working poor, with an emphasis on housing for the houseless individuals and home ownership for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. She joined Proud Ground, which is a local nonprofit, as the executive director in 2014 to promote permanently affordable home ownership for working families under the community land trust model. As many as you know, home ownership is one of the greatest ways that individuals can help to build generational wealth. Diane served as elected Multnomah County Chair and County Commissioner from 1998 to 2004. Why is a familiar name to many of you. She is a native Oregonian and has raised 2 children and lives and works in Northeast Portland presently. The theme of International Women's Month is Breaking the Bias. Diane has been involved in this work and helping to break the biases for almost 4 decades. We are so pleased to have her here. I want to thank one of our advisory council members, Steve, helped to make this connection. Diane, on behalf of the Community for Positive Aging and Hollywood Senior Center, we welcome you and thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit about your journey, speak about the work that you do to help break the bias, and also leadership, women in leadership in this community.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. And thanks, Steve, for bringing me in on this, because it's a wonderful opportunity to reflect. I'm frankly really looking forward to your questions. So if something comes to mind, there's this indicator down here, the reactions. Please just raise your hand. I just as soon interact with you along the way if you'd like. And then we'll definitely leave room for some questions at the end. But again, feel free to say, hey, I wonder about this, because this is a story of a woman's journey to kind of self-actualize and find leadership roles in different situations under different conditions. And I guess I bring to this conversation a lot of humility because I think while I got to do some amazing things along the way, the women I met and the kind of relationships I was able to build were just had such a big impact, and their impact on the state of Oregon and the city of Portland, you know, was so amazing over the course of time. So I want to share a little bit of that too. So growing up in Buckman neighborhood in Southeast Portland, kind of on the wrong side of the river in terms of where people come from to emerge into leadership positions, gave me a real kind of real life view into more lower income families. My mother started the first group home for teenage foster children in Buckman neighborhood, and I was about 12 at the time. So I grew up in an environment with about 6 kids at a time that were wards of the court that were living with us in our family home. I'm the 4th of 7 siblings, so we just had a bunch of kids, and that really shaped my view of social justice, along with the Catholicism that we practiced at the time, which was really about, you know, how do we make the community a better place to be. My mother was also the founding member of the Buckman Community Association, so there was a neighborhood association organizing element. She actually ran for the legislature, and I went with her door to door, and she helped shape the political junkie that I've become over the course of a lifetime. So coming out of that, I got to go to, you know, PSU. I mean, most of my classmates went to U of O and you know, a few people went to Stanford and all of that. Well, PSU was a place that some of us out of low income families could actually anchor and experience community life and politics firsthand. So I got to be a part of a, you know, political kind of journey that started really in college, which was the chance to go down to the legislative session for 2 sessions. And this is I get to tell you all this because you all embrace aging that we're all going through. So, and I tend not to like to talk about the actual dates because the younger people I talk to don't know what I'm referring to. But 77 and 79 were the first 2 sessions I got to observe as a student intern. My mother had run for the legislature against someone who many of you might remember well, a woman named Gretchen Kafori. And the 2 of them ended up kind of teaming up. My mom became her treasurer on her campaigns because they kind of merged their bases, and beat a guy who was really not appropriate representation of the area. So after that race was over, Gretchen invited me onto her staff as a student intern, and I got to be what really watched that woman work early in her career. And as some of you may know, Gretchen ended up on the county commission and then ultimately on the city council, and was the driving force. I mean, a single woman machine for affordable housing way before it was the talk of the town. She was the visionary when it came to affordable housing, and she had a huge impression on me all along the way. So let me just shout out to, and may she rest in peace, Gretchen Corey. We lost her about 6 years ago or so. The community lost a great champion. So being able to watch the legislative session in action and seeing someone like Earl Blumenauer, who again you all know serves in the Congress now, very young, budding young politician, refused to wear, I think he wore slippers onto the floor and made a big controversy, had a lot of controversy about that. And watching just the Roberts family, another again huge influence on my life was Barbara Roberts and Frank. Senator Frank Roberts was actually a professor at PSU, and he was my speech teacher. I'm going to pause for a minute. Adrian, you have a question? Or Bernadette?
Actually, it's Bernadette. I just
Bernadette.
wanted to know, at that time when the focus was on low-income housing, were African-American people included in that vision then?
You know, Gretchen, I think really did. She raised her family in Northeast Portland. She was a part of redistricting back in the day that created the first district so that the Black community could have a representative. it was very difficult and controversial. I think Gretchen had her eye on serving the Black community almost first and foremost. She thought there should be a representative in Salem, and she was right. And that, I think, with one exception, that district has always been represented by an African-American representative. I think her policies had to do with serving the most vulnerable, and she understood the impact of bad public policy, redlining, all the things that affected Black families all along. So I think she really was a champion. And I think actually gave up her seat in a way in the legislature to allow for that representation. Excellent point. And again, this was before anybody was even thinking about affordable housing, because you could buy a house in Portland, you could live, you could rent, you could be a musician and an artist and bang around the town back in the 70s and 80s. But she saw a real crisis coming, and she was ahead of the curve. So I got to watch Barbara Roberts emerge as assistant to her husband, Frank Roberts, who was a senator at the time. And again, she then ran for rep and then up the chain. And as you all know, became the first woman governor of the state of Oregon. And my ex-husband, Dick Springer, was also had served in the Oregon legislature with them too. He served for 16 years, and we all got to know each other. But if you haven't had a chance and you're interested, I highly recommend that you read the book Up the Capitol Steps by former Governor Barbara Roberts. And it talk about a journey of a woman who came out of a mother's intent to create a fair and just society for her developmentally disabled son, became governor of the state of Oregon, having really started in that place. And it's a beautiful story. So talk about a woman who represents probably, the ultimate goal of women in politics is to get to that level. So I'm a big fan of her and her book. So got to meet people like that along the way. As it turns out, PSU gave me the chance to go to City Hall and spend some time there as an intern, go to the county courthouse, watch the likes of Gladys McCoy, who was an extraordinary Black community leader and an elected official. Her and her husband both served in the legislature, and she served on the board of county commissioners. She and Pauline Anderson, who just recently passed at age 98 years old, showed me how women could really lead the way with their hearts and their heads. And I, am greatly indebted to both of them. After college, I got a chance to go back to Washington, D.C. and work for Ron Wyden, who of course is now the U.S. Senator and kind of an elder statesperson of our state. And he gave a lot of women a chance to really solidify a good political career, and he's supported a lot of people along the way. I lasted in DC only a year because I pined to come back to my home state of Oregon. And as it turns out, and I really am grateful for this opportunity, I ended up spending 8 years in the cable TV business and kind of cut my teeth in the private sector to see how that worked, because I think if you're going to try to understand how public policy works, how community works, how money flows, it's great to get some get some private sector experience. And that we did community programming, and I was the government channel coordinator, so I got to bring this political work to the cable company back in the early 80s, back before Comcast took it all over, and I now have no further connections with the cable business, and cannot help you with your cable TV services any longer. But I did learn a lot in those 8 years and worked my way up the chain and became director, vice president of programming and government affairs for a period of time in the private sector, and got to balance budgets, manage people, and learn a lot there. I think, again, the private sector needs to play a role in promoting women and supporting women. While back in the day, there were times when I was completely shut out because I was a young woman who clearly couldn't understand the complexity as a business. That did happen a few times. And at the same time, I was starting to have my children and had to juggle kind of it was not transparent. I had to be at work, focused during my work day. And then I was juggling 2 babies at home off and on for a period of time. And I know many of the women on this call know what I mean. It was back in the day where you didn't ask for accommodation for your children or flexibility. You just had to be there and be conscious, and whether or not you had a full night's sleep, which was rare, or not. So I think that's part of the experience of being a mother and being a part of the workforce. So I left the cable business and decided that having to represent a big business interest was not my heart and soul, and had to step out of that. And so I jumped into kind of a polar opposite role, which was executive director of Oregon NARAL, which is the National Abortion Rights Action League. I had been a volunteer and been working with all the women because I'd met all these political people. And by that time I was married to a state legislator and got access to a lot of, backroom conversations about political developments. The Webster decision had just passed the Supreme Court at that time. This is in 1990. And people were panicked about what it meant to Roe v. Wade to lose the kind of guarantee of the protection of abortion rights, right to choose at the federal level. And each state would have kind of an ability to add many more restrictions. Jumped into that job in the middle of the campaign. And what some of you may remember this, Oregon was the first state to defeat the parental notification measure. There were 2 measures on the ballot. It was the 8 and 10 campaign. We brilliantly linked the 2 of them together. One would have abolished the right to abortion in Oregon completely. The other one would have forced young women to get their parents' permission before they got services, reproductive services, which was a kind of a wedge issue that had made great headway in other states. We stopped it in Oregon. We defeated both of those measures, and I met brilliant women along the way. Mary Nolan, who now serves on the Metro board, was the chair of Oregon NARAL when I joined. We teamed up and we did a 1-2 no campaign on both of those measures. Stunned the national leaders because Oregon are organized well enough to defeat both of those measures. In the course of the 3 years I was director of Oregon NARAL, became the spokeswoman for the pro-choice movement. That was when doctors were being shot in their homes and in clinics were being bombed by terrorists. And it was a very traumatic time for us. We also ended up winning the day with the presidential campaign of Bill Clinton after many years of anti-choice reign. And I was able to go to the National Democratic Convention as what we called then the pro-choice whip for the state of Oregon, which was great fun. New York City, we thought we were never going to win again. Many of you might remember that period of time, but we did come out of that with a wonderful outcome, and we made great strides in righting the wrongs of the past on abortion rights. Now, sadly, we have taken a huge leap backwards, which is heartbreaking. And out of that experience, met the most, again, amazing, wonderful people in the choice movement. I then stepped into the city of Portland as director of the Office of Neighborhood Associations, which all along I had been actively involved in what was called the Oregon Women's Political Caucus, which again just promoted electing women to public office at every level. And we thought women should have a say, have an equal role in those decisions. And I met, State Senator Jane Cease, Shirley Gold, a Republican, Norma Paulus, back in the day, she also passed not long ago, told a whole group of us, and I was very young at the time, don't think about if you're going to run for public office, think about when. And that little message kind of embedded in the back of my brain, and I didn't even consciously think about it until much later when issues aligned and kind of opportunities aligned for my chance to run for the Board of County Commissioners. And that line probably was the thing that catapulted me into launching a campaign from scratch against already elected people. It was a tough campaign. I won 17 percentage points ahead of the other three candidates at that time in 98. And I think it was because I was a woman, I was a mom, and I was, born and raised in the district, and was able to communicate a message of real commitment to the community development and work that I wanted to be able to do on the board. Multnomah County is about taking care of people in need and people in trouble. And that was my heart's passion. And I got, just a wonderful opportunity to be, to represent the first district, which is inner Southeast and the whole west side of Portland. Best job I ever had was Multnomah County Commissioner. So you might wonder, well, you had an opportunity to run for county chair. Another woman that made a big impression on me along the way was Beverly Stein. She served as the Multnomah County chair back in the day. She stepped out to run for governor. An ill-fated decision, although I think, again, it's always an experience to run. And I think to run for public office forces you to dig deep around who you are, what you care about, what you want to do, what your motives are, how much your ego is involved. And it's very important to kind of, come to terms with that. And I think Beverly was a true public servant. So the opportunity to run for county chair, and the woman I ran against at the time is now serving on the city council, Joanne Hardesty. Her name was Bowman back then, Joanne Bowman. So we had a really raucous race and for county chair. And it was one of those races that everything came together, the endorsements and the money and all that. And I had a wonderful team of people working for me. And, it was an amazing experience. And, the role of county chair is very important because you actually oversee all the departments of the county, and you serve as the chair of the legislative committee, which is the rest of the board, and the budget committee, and you put out, the budget first. And it's just a very important role. It actually is quite a wonderful structure, I think, better than what the city of Portland has now, by the way. So it was an amazing job, had a great team of people. The first week in office, I think the first week of my communication director's job, 9/11 happened. And everything kind of topsy-turvied for quite a while. We lost $74 million of revenue in those years after. There was a .com bubble that burst, you may remember, during that period of time. So I, served at a very difficult time fiscally, and we really had to look at all the services across the boards, but we were still able to reform the mental health system, the homeless youth system, and we started and launched, and Beverly had a huge hand in this. The Sun School program was established at that point in time, and actually has thrived to this day. Then as several life events kind of hit me all at once, and long story short, a couple people walked into my office and said, "We want you to allow same-sex couples to marry in Multnomah County." I'm going to pause at that point. Adrienne and Bernadette.
I just wanted you to explain the Sun School system before you move forward.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. We had a youth commission that helped name that. It's called Schools Uniting Neighborhoods. And it really, we upset the apple cart of all the supports we were giving to children and families back then. And we restructured through a new framework, a way to get services embedded into schools where children and families go every day. And it was a partnership with the principal. A Sun School coordinator would work with them and suss out which kids were struggling, both the quiet ones and the ones that were acting out, to give them support so they could do better academically. Beautiful after school programs, they'd have a snack, do some homework, and then they could go play. And then that might mean cooking, theater, soccer, and the kids would come up with what they wanted to do. It was really kid-centered and led. And it hasn't grown to the level we hoped it would by this point, but it is still happening out there, really engaging kids between 3 and 6 p.m. in the evening. And having come from the choice movement, I'll tell you, a lot of pregnancies happened in that window of time. And the Sun Schools were an effort to, among many other things, to keep kids engaged in a positive way. So that's the Sun School program. So a few people walked in my room, my office, and said, you know, I think George W. Bush at the time had made this comment that, you know, we, in the State of the Union address that January, and said, we can't allow people who aren't a man and a woman to marry. And that kind of set off a firestorm of reaction. And in progressive places like Portland, I think the LGBTQ community said, well, you know, what if we do it here and now? And so I knew it was a leadership challenge and a game changer. And we, along with my colleagues, we announced that we would allow same-sex couples to receive marriage licenses in Multnomah County, like any other couple. And you may remember the news coverage of, you know, couples wrapped all the way around the building, Multnomah County, and the chaos around that. I can tell you in a couple words that it was both the best and the worst days of my life in a way. There were death threats. The antis were just dumbstruck that we would do this. The pro community was celebratory. There were weddings going on, rings being sold, flowers all over the place. And then there was this group in the middle who, you know, people who had given me money, who had supported my political career, who called me, and I said, who do you think you are? You've made me feel uncomfortable. How do you think you're supposed to be able to make these kinds of decisions? And what I came to understand is when they had talked about equity and supported, you know, same-sex couples, they didn't really mean true equal. They meant, well, maybe you could do like civil marriages and we could dance our way into it. And we knew we were hopefully on the side of history, you know, history in the making. And at the same time, it set off a whole series of reactions that ended up bringing my political career to a pretty extraordinary nosedive. And, you know, I actually was Rogue of the Year in the Willamette Week, and that was a week after Neil Goldschmidt's expose of having really raped, without equivocation, a 13-year-old child, for not just once or twice, but over a 3-year window. One of my political heroes, because I had got a chance to work with Neil Goldschmidt way back in the day, and broke my heart. And still, because I had allowed same-sex couples to marry, and a few other things like snow days debacle and paying a library director at a certain level, it was just a layer on, and I was kind of vilified at the time. And it really kind of stripped my opportunities in Oregon. I couldn't work here. I couldn't apply for any other jobs. I had been county chair. I'd been high profiled. I had stepped out of line as a young woman from the wrong side of the tracks, and I was kind of banished. Pause.
I'm just having a little trouble. I wasn't living here then. So you were given the same level of disrespect as Goldschmidt for your actions? Is that what you're saying politically?
I think he could have been Rogue of the Year and actually deserved it. I think Rogue is, can you hear me okay? I've got a little bit of instability on this end.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I wouldn't say it was the same disrespect, but I would say that, you know, allowing same-sex couples to marry, and 3,000 couples did marry. Now those marriages were annulled, and we had to kind of regroup, and ultimately it took 10 years to kind of make it for real in the long run. So it really, it was a profile. It was kind of a profilable leadership scenario that stepped too far out in front of the community. And I think, and being a young woman in the position I was in, didn't help, let's just say. And there was some craziness that happened with my colleagues, and we won't go into that today. I mean, electing women to office doesn't mean everything's going to go smoothly and we're all going to work well together and love each other the whole time. That's also not true. So I'm not going to, unless anybody has questions about it, I'd rather not necessarily go into the mean girls scenario right now, because that was just a downside. But I will say that it was an extraordinary experience, and I wouldn't have traded it for the world. And now in the end, people go to marriage, go to weddings, and they don't know if they're same sex or not. And we helped put a face on the issue of same sex marriage, and that to be an elected official and allow people to be honored for loving who they love and raising children in community was an amazing gift. So that happened, and I really had to leave town. I could not work here, and I went down to Marin County, California, and ran a homeless agency for 6 years. And I'm not sure quite how much time I have, but I think I'm going to pause after spending 6 years in the homeless community and working down there in Marin County, which was a gorgeous place to land and a great gift in its own sense. The opportunity to come back to Oregon and a full circle gift of being able to provide home ownership opportunities, working with the likes of Steve Whitson, our once and future and always member of the team. It just has been amazing. And handing the keys, I mean, I don't get to do this personally myself very often, but handing the keys to families who want to anchor their homes in community and allow them to really have the stability of home ownership, be able to plant gardens and have pets. One thing we learned in the back in the days at Multnomah County, we were working really hard on supporting public schools and public funding for schools. Big debates back then. In fact, at one point we imposed a 3-year temporary personal income tax to help fill out the rest of the school year. There was threats of the Portland Public Schools closing 6 weeks early. I had a child as a junior in high school at the time and a freshman, and that hit home really hard. And we ended up negotiating with another political hero of mine, former Mayor Vera Katz, and I got to work shoulder to shoulder on some shuttle diplomacy between the board of the Portland School Board and the teachers union, and we were able to reach an impasse, but an agreement, but partly because Multnomah County took the lead in promoting this personal income tax to temporarily support schools and mental health and some other services. And that passed the voters by a hair, but it passed. And then people had to pay the bill. That didn't go over real well. So I would also say probably a part of my political kind of instability towards the end was we asked people to write an extra check to support public schools. The reason I bring up the public school systems and the importance of public education is because I think it's the one leg up for working families and opportunity to get out of the cycle of poverty. What we found was when kids get moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, it interrupts their schooling to the extent of really undermining their development. So, having the opportunity to now match, public school support and a home that kids can live in for the duration of their school experience has been another real gift. And being able to work with the amazing team at Proud Ground to implement what's called community land trust, turning the market on its head and saying, you know what, we care less about the speculative work of building or building equity for corporations or individuals, and we care more about the affordability for working families. That is our focus. Has been an amazing be able to do right now. Probably my greatest frustration is just we want to be able to serve more people. So I spend a lot of time in the political arena, again, now as an advocate asking for support for really tackling the gap between the 64% of white families that own homes compared to the 35% of Black families. And this goes way back to inequities and structures that just shut out Black families and Indigenous and Latinx families. Asian families have had a little bit more access to homeownership, but not nearly as much as white. So there's a gap, and we are working our hearts out to try to make an impact on that gap so we can bring families into homeownership and give them the chance to build equity. And it's a shared equity program. So we bring a down payment, help facilitate a manageable mortgage for them that really fits their income. And they can build that equity, pay themselves back, and or stay in the home forever and give it to their kids. If they do sell, they get what they've earned, a quarter of the increase of value, and then we resell that home to the next income qualified family. And it's a permanent affordability model, which is extraordinary, because if we don't get some of these homes off the market, they'll continue to skyrocket in value. We all know what that's about, right? I need to pause for a minute and plug my computer in. So please bear with me for just a minute. I'm gonna grab a cord. Hold on one second. Okay, be right back. So please, I'd love to pause here, and please let me know what you're more interested in hearing, or I may have political people along the way that I haven't mentioned yet that I had the great honor. I guess I would have to say that the other thing that happened along the way in the fun category is I was able to be a part of a women's poker club, which is we just had great fun. It was a friendly game, trust me. It included Barbara Roberts played with us a couple times. Betty Roberts, the former Supreme Court Justice, extraordinary poker player, loved her. She was such amazing support to me through thick and thin. She stuck with me to the bitter end. My last race for county chair was against current mayor Ted Wheeler, who beat me for that position because of the destabilization of what happened after the same-sex marriage decision. I wouldn't want his job for the world right now, to be perfectly honest. A Texas Hold'em fan, yay. Texas, we played a lot of Texas Hold'em. I learned how to play Texas Hold'em with the likes of former County Commissioner Tanya Collier, a woman that worked for the city, I think lead staff to Earl Blumenauer. And trust me, we did a lot of gossiping along the way, little storytelling and information sharing, and had a blast. We played for 10 years together, and you get to know somebody when you play poker with them. Let's just say that. So other questions or areas you'd love me to kind of touch on? Steve.
Hi, Diane. It's so great to hear you speak again. You always do such a great job. I've said this to you before, but there was a time that I walked into your office after having made a mistake, a pretty big mistake, although I can't remember what it was. And I really wasn't sure how you were going to react. And I remember that your goal was really to make me feel better. It seemed. You told me that you told me about a mistake that you had made. And I just, that just really sort of struck me as such an amazing management style to be able to treat people with such respect and to have such an insight about how to motivate people to get the best from them. And I'm just wondering, did you come up with that on your own, or did somebody teach you that?
Well, I did get the opportunity to go to the Kennedy School of Government and do a 6-week intensive leadership training for senior executives. And that was before I ran for public office. And there's where I came to understand the role of leadership. And to motivate people to do their very best requires the opportunity to fail miserably. And boy, I hope you've all heard the theme of highs and lows, because you cannot progress, you cannot learn unless you've made really significant, not just little, minor errors, but big ones. So I think the Kennedy School of Government was a place that I learned that leadership means that you upset the apple cart. You cannot change the world unless you're willing to take the heat for doing it ahead of where people are comfortable. We're talking about changing the status quo. And when you change the status quo, that means you're forcing people to think of things differently. And some people are much easier to come to that than other people are. So that's where I think I picked up on, and also the wonderful original boss I had at the cable company, who's now, frankly, my personal partner. He's just handed me a cup of coffee. He was my very first supervisor for the 8 years I spent at the cable company, and he was a wonderful model for boss supervision too. So I think we have Linda, and then we'll go back to Bernadette or Adrian. Linda?
Yes, thank you, Diane, for being here, being with us today. But I hope this isn't too political, but I wanted to touch base on Metro and the bond issue that we voted in a couple years ago for housing, which was totally outside of Metro's purview in my eyes, but that's neither here nor there now. They somehow are having trouble figuring out what to do with all that money. And I'm wondering, are you going to be entitled, your agency going to be entitled to get some of that money if they can ever get their act together?
Well, Linda, on this one, I'm going to disagree. We help promote that measure because housing and affordable housing is a region-wide challenge. If Multnomah County and the city of Portland are the only jurisdictions that step up and pass measures, and any of us that live in the city of Portland know what our property taxes are looking like, higher and higher, because we've had to backfill the inability of either the federal, state, or local governments from investing in public education and mental health and affordable housing. So we've had to fill in the gaps, and we're paying for it. So I have always felt very strongly, and spent about 3 years when I was on the Board of County Commissioners pushing Metro into it. So we'll disagree, into the arena of affordable housing, because without that, here's the regional government that has the ability to look across 3 different major counties. And Washington County and Clackamas County had kind of been quiet, stayed out of the mix, didn't really want to take any responsibility for affordable housing. It was putting a lot more pressure in the central city and East County, which took a huge impact from people migrating. And of course, the extraordinary displacement that happened in the Black community. 10,000 families were displaced out of inner Northeast, and that's probably a low estimate, and pushed farther east into what we call the numbers, or out to Gresham. So to have a regional bond that actually really reached the entire region and engaged all the elected officials from all the jurisdictions, I felt was a very important thing, and I supported that. I do think that if you look on the website, there's a big kind of status report, or what they would call a progress report on the expenditures of the bond. And they're making extraordinary progress, especially for families below 30% of median income, or individuals trying to get people off the streets with supportive housing services. In answer to your question about how much could we access, Habitat for Humanity and Proud Ground, who work shoulder to shoulder with the culturally specific agencies in support, have been pounding on the door of Metro to get them to please give us a chance to put families into permanent equity building, breaking the cycle of poverty housing. And we have a window of hope in both Clackamas and Washington County, because there's the opportunity to migrate some HUD homes into home ownership. Steve knows all about this. And we really hope to use Metro bond money for that. And it might take a little advocacy. So if you're interested, I can certainly let you know. But that bond measure's been pretty important step in the right direction to create housing that can get people off the streets, stabilize families, and also we hope generate some home ownership.
Thank you, because I really do support Brown Ground.
Oh, thank you so much.
I was so surprised when I got a thank you note and you were signing it.
Of course, it's what
I did not realize that you were the head of it. So thank you for doing a great job there. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? I'm kind of looking across the top of my screen to see. We're coming up on about 10 minutes left. Oh, Bernadette, please. Adrian. Oh, there you are. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is about, the past 15 years and the flipping of Northeast Portland. How much more difficult has that made your job? When I talked to Habitat, they talked about the costs of actually being able to find housing in Northeast now because of that. And so that people actually aren't able to necessarily move back to Northeast from the outer areas. And can you address the challenges that the increased costs here are making, and how this new build a McMansion on a small plot, which is destroying Northeast, what can be done about that, if anything?
On the last point, we have, I've been a part of an advocacy team that has promoted residential infill. It's got a bad acronym. It's called RIP, Residential Infill Project. That has been a huge step in the right direction of breaking this model of single family homes being the only kind of homes that can be built in a huge portion of the city of Portland. That means you're locking out the opportunity for middle housing, duplexes, tris, quads, townhomes, cottage clusters of 6 or so on smaller lots. So we're breaking some ground on that McMansion problem, because if you can house 3 families or 4 families or 6 at a lower level of lower cost, that's always better. On the issue of Northeast Portland, we've been a part of the home ownership team that has tackled the opportunity to create new units of housing, because the average home sale in, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, is upwards of 450,000 now, if not more, and rising every day because the market's so out of control. So we're really working with Habitat, and they have actually built two different projects, 12 units on Olin Street and another 30 units on Kilpatrick. It's the Kenton project, and we've been matching families who come off a list that's called, that it was created by the city of Portland, called the preference policy, which it's a little long bureaucratic process, but it was intended to pull people who had historical ties to Northeast and give them a chance to move back in. That has worked for both the rental projects that have developed in Northeast, and a few, not enough, because we had a condo project that was going to be a really big boost to that got bumped off the tracks because of COVID. Yeah, the preference policy has been a way to not violate fair housing laws, but bring Black families back into the community. I think it's better if it's home ownership. It's important if it's rental that people can afford too. So we support our partners very strongly in their effort to bring families back into the rental units that have been built by PCRI and Innovative Housing and REACH. So there's been progress, some, not nearly enough. Ms. Woods?
Yes, I'm wondering how you use your volunteers. What can people do other than contribute financially? So yeah, that's my question.
We are not so much a volunteer-centered organization, because our work is around prepping people to become mortgage ready, matching them with homes, getting subsidy connected, bringing to closing, and then post-purchase supports. The team that's really volunteer intensive is our Habitat partners. And I can't encourage you more that if you really have the time and want to dig in, and it doesn't always have to be swinging a hammer, but that's the sweat equity model, where the community comes together, works with the families that are working their way into homes, And and they have a whole volunteer rubric to be involved in. So yes, contributing is always a wonderful way to go. But if you know people who have the time to actually volunteer, I couldn't encourage you more to work with the Habitat team. You know, our focus is families at 60 to 80% of median income. The Habitat team really works hard, and they are an international brand, and they have a fundraising machine to really serve families at 30 to 60% of median income. And a lot of refugee and immigrant families, I think their stats are up to 95 plus people of color in their new homes that they're building. So it's communal barn raising. It's exactly what it is, and definitely help send people that way because they need all the help they can get, especially post-COVID.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions? Speak up if I don't see your.
Bernadette again. I'm sorry, I have tons of
Hit me.
questions. So I guess you wouldn't be interested in running for mayor and trying to get us back on track with a focus on the people who really need help. And with your experience, being able to navigate the complexities that are currently not being navigated well. I mean, if we could get the new structure of government to actually give the mayor power, would you be willing to take that on? I'm just asking.
Well, I'm flattered, and and I have a 35-year-old son who's a union organizer. He works at SCIDU, and he's just both his parents, me and my ex, ran for office and served. And he's not this kind of, well, I'm going to run and he's much more of a scholar and an organizer in his own right. And I look at his generation and I think of, you know, how are people being set up to step in and run at an age where they don't have as much experience. I think it's critically important that we bring a range of experience to the table and perspective, because millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, there's a couple other in there somewhere, and now we've got Zs that are coming into the scene. And there's a lot of cynicism, a lot of concern about being an elected official. We've had a revolving door at the city council, which has destabilized the Portland City Council in a big way. My dear friend Steve Novick, who ran and served for a period of time, high integrity guy, very bright, dealt with his own disability issues all his life. Wasn't good enough for the Portland political scene. Got chucked out, replaced by Chloe Daly. She went in there and did her best to fight for tenants and affordable housing. She got chucked out, new guys in. And the learning curve is very steep. The form of government simply doesn't work, in my opinion, anymore. With a weak mayor who can't establish a vision for where we should all work together to go, which is what I would want to promote, is a vision. Get everybody on track, and all the things that happen along the way don't distract you. They just, you just keep focused. And we're getting buffered around by people's reaction to the trash and the people sleeping on the streets, of which we should. But you can't just react. You have to kind of plan in advance and solve the problem and do it systemically for the long haul. I would hope that younger people than me would step into these leadership roles, but I certainly would love to be a party to supporting people and maybe bringing some insight from the past if they're willing to hear it.
So is the Women's Political Caucus able to locally provide support and training for women, younger women who want to take on these roles, to help better prepare them for those roles? Because I know that WinPAC does it for the legislature, but this is for the other stuff.
The Oregon Women's Political Caucus has been now replaced by a group called Emerge. And I have not been actively involved with them for a while. I have dear friends that are very, very involved, and they do political training. And to run a campaign, you got to know what you're doing. You can't just decide to serve and decide to run. You've got to be able to raise certain level of money. You got to have organized, and you got to do a numbers game to get to the voters. And some of us have done that. it's changed so much since I did it, so I can't claim to be a resident expert anymore. But yeah, they're out there to support women to run. Your name is Community for Positive Action. So,
Oh, it's
Michael,
Michael. Yeah.
Michael, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask a little bit more, we understand like you're so busy, and what do you do to relax, and how often do you get to do it?
Well, I'm at the Oregon coast right now, and I still love to play poker, but I don't play often enough anymore. Hiking and biking around Oregon and Portland is just a great gift. Kayaking on the Willamette River, all those wonderful things. And that son I just mentioned has delivered into our lives, he and his wife, 2 beautiful twin babies, a boy and a girl, yay. And we're just over the moon about that. I actually do have another call to bounce onto at 11.
Okay.
I would love to, if you have any further questions, of course, Steve knows where to find me for sure. And Michael, you too. Let's keep the conversation going with, really encouraging people to run and serve is maybe my final message. Not just women, but let's encourage people to be a part of the solution and to have a vision and to have the courage to step into the fray. And there's a lot of us out here that can support them.
Diane, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and you have so much knowledge, and you've done so much, and we appreciate you passing that on. So keep up
Thank
your
you.
amazing work. And yeah, if I'll have the recording if anybody wants to follow up and get that. So thank you, Diane.
Awesome. Thank you to all of you and have a wonderful day. See you soon.
All right, bye.